The idea of one single God, it seems pretty simple on the surface, right? But this one concept totally reshaped human history. We're talking sparking empires, defining morality for entire civilizations, and guiding billions of lives. But where did this revolutionary idea actually come from? Well, the answer is way more complex and, honestly, more surprising than you might think. So, yeah, that's the big question we're tackling. Where did this radical belief in just one God come from? It definitely didn't just pop up out of thin air. We're going to trace its journey from a pretty controversial concept to a global force that, still defines our world today. So, let's get into it. All right, so first things first, we need to get our terms straight. Because when we talk about one God, it's not as simple as just counting to one. This whole concept, it's got layers. Okay, so at its very core, monotheism is the belief in one supreme being. But it's not like a simple on or off switch. You have to think of it more like a spectrum, which is actually super important for understanding how this belief changed over time. And here you can really see what I mean by a spectrum. Over on the left, you've got what's called exclusive monotheism. That's the firm belief that only one God exists, period, no others. But then on the right, you have something called monolatry. This is more like saying, sure, maybe there are other gods out there, but our God is the only one that matters and the only one we're going to worship. And this idea, monolatry, is a really big deal because a lot of scholars think it was the crucial stepping stone to what we now think of as monotheism. So, how do we get from that idea of monolatry to strict exclusive monotheism? Well, that brings us to what is arguably the most influential shift in the history of religion, the Abrahamic Revolution. The ideas that came out of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they would change absolutely everything. And right here, we see a truly game-changing idea take shape: ethical monotheism. This is where, for the first time, the concept of one God was directly tied to a single universal moral code. This was revolutionary. It meant that morality wasn't just a local custom anymore. It was a divine, unchanging law that applied to everyone. Think about how huge that is. Suddenly, God wasn't just powerful. God was the very source of what it means to be good. And you can see on this timeline just how powerfully that idea took off. It really starts to solidify in Judaism around the 6th century BCE. Then, a few centuries later, Christianity takes this Jewish concept of one ethical God and, using the incredible infrastructure of the Roman Empire, spreads it across the globe. And then, in the 7th century CE, Islam is founded, building on those same foundations to present a vision of strict, universal monotheism for all of humanity. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. The Abrahamic tradition wasn't the only place this idea was brewing. Incredibly, the concept of a single supreme being popped up independently all over the world, and in some cases, even earlier. Let's take a trip to ancient Egypt for a second. Around 1344 BCE, you have this pharaoh, Akhenaten, who tried to completely overhaul Egyptian religion. He took a pretty minor solar deity, the Aten, and declared it was the only god. He basically tried to erase the entire traditional pantheon. I mean, can you imagine? This was a huge revolutionary move, and it's often pointed to as one of history's first experiments in monotheism. And just listen to this line from a hymn to the Aten. It really captures how radical this was. O sole God beside whom there is none. I mean, it doesn't get much clearer than that. But here's the thing. It didn't stick. After Akhenaten died, Egypt pretty quickly went back to its traditional pantheon of gods. Now let's jump over to ancient China, going way back to the Shang dynasty. Here, there was a focus on a supreme, all-powerful force they called Shangdi, or heaven. This is often called a kind of wide monotheism, because even though Shangdi was the top dog, so to speak, people still honored all these other lesser spirits and their ancestors. And it doesn't stop there. If we look at the vast steppes of Central Asia, we see that Turkic and Mongol peoples practiced Tengrism. Their whole faith was centered on Tengri, the eternal and all-powerful sky god. It's just another piece of proof that this idea wasn't just happening in one place. Okay, let's fast forward a bit to 16th century India with the founding of Sikhism. It's a strictly monotheistic faith, and its core belief is captured perfectly in this symbol you see here, Ik Onkar, which literally means one universal creator God. So we've seen monotheism pop up all over the world. But I want to circle back to the tradition that really had the most global impact, the Israelite one. Because even there's this really fascinating and very lively debate among scholars about where it all really began. And that brings us right to the heart of a huge debate among historians and biblical scholars. Were the ancient Israelites monotheistic from day one, or did their faith evolve over time, maybe moving from polytheism through that monolatry stage we talked about, and only then arriving at exclusive monotheism? And the crazy thing is, the textual evidence, well, it can be read in two completely different ways. See, it all comes down to how you interpret these ancient texts. One camp will point to passages like this one from Deuteronomy, and they'll say, look, there is no God besides me. Case closed. That's clearly exclusive monotheism. But then the other side comes back and says, hang on a second. That's just powerful rhetoric. They see it as more of a my God can beat up your God kind of claim, a classic example of monolatry, giving primacy to their God, YHW, without actually denying that other gods might exist. It's a really fascinating debate that all hinges on interpretation. So where does this whole journey leave us? What's the bottom line? First, we've learned that monotheism isn't just one thing, it's a whole spectrum. We've also seen how the Abrahamic faiths took that idea and fused it with ethics, and that changed the world. We've found out that it's a global idea, something that sprang up in many different cultures. And finally, we've learned that even its most famous origin story is still something scholars are intensely debating today. And all of this leaves us with one last, really big question. For a long time, the shift from many gods to one was seen as a kind of evolution, a natural step forward for religion. But was it really an endpoint? Or is the belief in one God simply one of many powerful paths that we humans have explored on our spiritual journey? It's a huge question that's still shaping our world today, and definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.